You know, when you think of Adam Smith, the guy on the back of the 20-pound note, you probably think you know the story. Father of economics, right? The prophet of free markets. But what if I told you the popular image we all have of him isn't just a little bit wrong, but the complete opposite of what he actually believed? Today, we are going to peel back centuries of myth to get to the real and frankly kind of shocking philosophy of Adam Smith, and what we find might just change how you see everything. Because that's really the core question here, isn't it? The man whose name gets thrown around to justify deregulation, unchecked corporate power, and a totally hands-off government, well, he actually spent most of his life warning us about the dangers of all three. This isn't just some dusty historical footnote. Getting the real Adam Smith right completely changes how we think about the economic world we live in right now.
So before we can dig into the man himself, we have to talk about the legend, because over the last 100 years or so, this entire mythology has been built around his name. And this story is everywhere. It's become common sense, a version of Adam Smith that's simple, clean, and, well, ideologically very, very convenient.
Right, this is the guy we all learned about in school, yeah? Adam Smith, the laissez-faire dude, let it be, hands off. The guy who apparently believed that greed is good, that if we all just chase our own selfish desires, some magical, invisible hand will guide society to the best possible outcome. It's a really powerful story. There's just one tiny problem with it. The real Adam Smith never said any of that.
So to find the real Adam Smith, we have to do something really important. We have to separate the man from the mascot that was created in his name. We've got to go back to 18th century Scotland and look at the world he was actually living in and writing about. A world that, by the way, was not one of free markets. It was a world of powerful monopolies and state-controlled trade.
And wow, this contrast, it's everything. The mascot we know is the father of economics, the so-called prophet of greed. But the real man, he didn't even think of himself as an economist. He was a moral philosopher. His life's work wasn't a celebration of greed. It was a deep dive into empathy and morality. And far from being some idol of corporations, he was one of their most ferocious critics. See, way before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, Smith wrote this, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, and this book right here is the absolute key to understanding his entire worldview. In it, he argues that the foundation of a good society isn't self-interest. It's what he called sympathy, our amazing ability to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. He was convinced that societies only work when people act with decency and a sense of responsibility for each other. He didn't think greed drives the world. He thought our moral compass does. And get this. This is a direct quote from The Wealth of Nations, and it reveals just how suspicious he was of big business. He wrote, "People of the same trades seldom meet together, but the conversation ends in a conspiracy against the public." Basically, he's saying when powerful business leaders get together behind closed doors, the rest of us usually get screwed. This is the guy who supposedly championed unregulated markets. He explicitly warned that when corporations get too much power, they will rig the system in their own favor to deceive and oppress the public.
Okay, and that brings us to the big one, the biggest myth of them all, the invisible hand. It's the one phrase everyone knows, the supposed cornerstone of his whole philosophy. You know, the idea that the market, if you just leave it alone, will automatically create the best society for everyone. But the truth about what Smith actually meant by this phrase, well, it's one of the biggest plot twists in the history of economic thought.
So, across his entire life's work, all his books, all his essays, all his letters, how many times do you think Adam Smith used his most famous phrase, the invisible hand? Hundreds? Maybe dozens? Nope. The answer is 3. Just 3 times. And as you're about to see, not a single one of them was meant to describe some universal law of free markets. And each one is more revealing than the last. The first time he mentions an invisible hand is in an essay about astronomy, where he uses it to describe the superstition of ancient people who blamed invisible gods for things like thunder. It has absolutely nothing to do with economics. At all. The second time, the famous one from The Wealth of Nations, isn't about some grand market law. It's a metaphor for a merchant's fear. He's talking about a business owner who's too scared to invest overseas, so he keeps his money at home, which accidentally helps the local economy. It's an anecdote about anxiety, not some law of capitalism. And the third and final time, it's in his book on morality, where he says the invisible hand is what makes a rich landlord's gluttony accidentally feed the poor, only because there's a physical limit to how much food one person can eat. It's an observation about human limits, not a celebration of inequality. So let's just recap that, right? Superstition, fear, and gluttony. Those are Smith's 3 invisible hands. That is not the holy trinity of free market economics. For Smith, these were just little footnotes on human imperfection, these weird, rare moments where private feelings accidentally led to a public good. It was the exception, not the rule. But I guess that doesn't make for a very convenient political slogan, does it? So you have to be asking, right? If the invisible hand wasn't his big idea, how in the world did it become the only thing people know about him? Well, this didn't happen by accident. It was a very deliberate rebranding of Adam Smith that happened over more than a century, turning this complex moral philosopher into a simple one-dimensional mascot.
It all started back in the late 1800s. You had these industrial giants, the railroad tycoons, the steel barons, and they needed an intellectual defense for their massive power and their fight against any kind of regulation. A really simplified, cherry-picked version of Smith was the perfect cover story. Then, fast forward to the mid-20th century, and a group of free market economists, known as the Chicago School, took that one, single, obscure metaphor and turned it into a core doctrine, proof that markets always fix themselves. And finally, in the 80s, during the Cold War, it became a simple, powerful weapon. Capitalism had the invisible hand, communism had the iron fist. Smith's idea, totally stripped of its original meaning, became pure ideology.
And there you have it. That's how it happened. All the nuance just got erased. All his warnings about corporate power, about monopolies, about businesses conspiring against the public, conveniently deleted. They took the one phrase that served their agenda and threw the rest of his philosophy in the trash. The real Adam Smith was replaced by a caricature, a mascot built to serve a political goal he would have never, ever supported.
Okay, so why are we even talking about this? Why does getting Adam Smith right actually matter today? Because his real warnings, the ones that got edited out of the story, are more relevant now than they have ever been. See, Smith's world was dominated by the East India Company, a corporation so powerful it had its own army. He saw up close what happens when corporate and political power get tangled up, and his predictions, they're just eerily familiar.
I mean, look at this list. He was warning about the exact stuff we deal with today. Corporate capture of government through lobbying? Check. Monopolies crushing competition? He called the East India Company a blood-stained monopoly. Makes you wonder what he'd call some of our tech giants today. He warned that when the most powerful players write the rules, the market stops being a market. It just becomes a rigged game. And you know what? Pretty much every major financial crisis of the last century, from the Great Depression to 2008, can be traced right back to that exact problem he identified.
And maybe the biggest myth of all, this idea of a hands-off government. Yeah. That's not Smith either. He argued the government had three essential jobs. 1, defense, 2, justice, but 3, and this is the one everyone forgets, was creating and maintaining public works and institutions that would never be profitable for a private company, but were essential for society. We're talking roads, bridges, and especially public education. He believed that while factories were productive, they could also make workers stupid and ignorant, and it was the government's job to provide education to fight that. The man was a huge believer in smart, targeted government intervention.
So here's the real takeaway. The final lesson from the real Adam Smith is that he never believed markets would magically save us. He argued that we have to save ourselves. He understood that markets aren't some force of nature. They are a human creation. And because of that, they need rules, they need oversight, and they need moral boundaries to work for everyone. The real Adam Smith wasn't an ideologue. He was a pragmatist. And his final, urgent lesson is that markets are shaped by rules. Which leaves us with the most important question of all, in our world today, who's writing them?